Okay, this last part of the presentation is about screenshots to answer any questions of how I use Adobe Camera Raw and also Adobe Photoshop. So now we're going to talk about Adobe Camera Raw, and we're going to start with some screenshots. So the basic section, I start with the white dropper for the white balance. Now for HDR photography, and tonight, as you saw, is I zeroed out the highlights, I plussed out the shadows. So I also increase or decrease the exposure and contrast to get the effect that I like. And sometimes you have to increase the exposure. And then I used to do this for black and white photography. I decrease the saturation and vibrance all the way negative, but now I do all this in Photoshop. And for light painting, I don't touch the highlights. I don't touch the shadows. I just do a white balance dropper. And then for the chromatic operations and Camera profile, both of those checked. I'll talk about that screen later in this presentation. So this is just the first basic session of how I use Adobe Camera Raw. This is the curve section where I just try to make a curve. I don't touch this. I just try to make a curve. There's data, so it looks like it has a good contrast. I rarely ever use these sliders, or practically never. I just make the yes curve up here. For sharpening, anything non-portrait related, I like to use at least 140. And for portraits, I actually like to use 120 or less. For noise reduction, I like to use at least 50. The color noise reduction, I just like to use between 30 and 40, maybe 30, 35, but sometimes I have to view up 100% and then increase the noise reduction. If they see blacks, it means you're using it too much. So that's why I got to lower it. And generally between 30 and 30, 40. Then I always check, remove chromatic aberrations and use profile corrections. And this is the second thing I do with light painting, but this is like the fourth or fifth I do with the regular still life. And I have my lens profile and I have my, it'll say the camera that I used. In this case is the standard 125. And I like to use, of course, the prime lenses because it's the sharpest focus. The geometry, as you saw in the demo, I went into the Adobe Camera Raw and I just clicked on A and it straightened out the photograph. And a lot of times I just click A and it does the work for me. Now I can rotate it. I can work on the verticals here, but I'd rather just click on this. I've used others, but a lot of times I just click on the A. And if you have to constrain the clock, I could click this, but I just click A and I'm done. And I'd rather just rotate it vertical and horizontal in Photoshop if I have to, if I still don't like it. But a lot of times, just click A. For the effects, and sometimes you need to put in a slight vignetting, and you want to look at the photograph more than the number. You'll know if it's too dark, but if it's just a slight vignette, where you barely notice it, because if you use too much, it's too obvious. But it's probably better to use too less than too much. And there are other vignetting techniques that I use in Photoshop, and I did them in the lab. Use a gradient map layers. I was using the gradient layer, but I could use a gradient map. But I use both. But tonight in the demo, I just use a gradient. Now we're going to talk about Photoshop screenshots for more clarification. So this is one of the first few actions that I do. If I were doing an HDR, I would select all the layers. I would run this action, and it would do auto align and auto blend, automatic. Then the second, it's the image auto correct. I would run the levels auto contrast, and the levels and the auto level. So when I run this, all this happens: auto tone, auto contrast, and auto color. The beginning set of apparatus, I just make a copy of the duplicate layer. Then apply action auto. And I would just, it would run the auto, the 3 auto features. Then to save, I would save it. I would save it in Photoshop, but I would change the name. And then when I image auto correct, it would come down over here and do the levels auto contrast, and a lotus auto black and white and ultra neutral. So now the dodge and burn, it's just a group of actions where this is called somewhere else. It calls this action. It calls another step. In these last 2 steps, the black signature, the white signature, this happens, and then make adjustment layer, this happens, and the auto. And then I burn with the luminosity blend mode. I dodge with the screen blend mode. And make sure I have the brush 100%. And the background actions, there's many ways I can do this. I could dust and scratches, the speckle. There's no prompt for the speckle. The dust and scratches have the 1.3. Then the high pass, you have to set to 10. Then a frame development where I call this action. This action is called in this group. So this happens. And so then I play end of the cond. This happens. And then this is a condition. If it's landscape, this happens. If it's not, this happens. So after all those actions, we have 400 pixels, we have 294, the longest side is set to 4,000. If the width for the height of the height, the height will be 4,000, this would be a different number. The resolution is 600 pixels per inch, and the resample is automatic. The unsharp mask, if I were to just run this action, I'd have it at 200, and I just want to use 1.0 for every pixel. I don't like these 1.5 for half. I feel like it's better with, you concentrate on 1 pixel, not 1.5 pixels. And the threshold, I like to use between 6 and 7 for the unsharp mask. There's another, background set of actions where I call the speckle, it's no prompts. I call the unsharp mask, and it'll say fade unsharp mask, and it doesn't scratches prompt is up here. And my other set of grouped actions where the speckle is here, unsharp mask, and then dust and scratches where this time I didn't decide to use the fade. My J's Fittings workflow is every time I do an export or save for legacy, I like to have a quality 100. And I know I use 60, but I like to use different, settings from time to time. I want to ask every time we're exported. So, but Photoshop will remember where you saved it last, and it'll copy that, right? Copyright and contact. Since we're posing for the web, we're going to convert the sRGB. But if you want to copy and paste this JPEG into the photograph, you don't want to have this check. But it depends how you're using it. And then very similar to the quick export, I save it. Remember the last time where you save it, I could just like save legacy to the web. And then the action with edit is paste in place, where I make a selection, I copy it, but then when I want to paste it, I paste in place. And every time I do this, I end up with the light blend mode. It's great for light painting. It's, you know, black hides, white revealed. So on a black layer mask, we're painting in white because we want to reveal the lighting improvements from the LED flashlight. It's called light painting. You paint with the LED flashlight. That's one part. Another part is to paint the improvements in Photoshop on a black layer mask, and you paint in white, but you're doing it in a light and blend mode. The frequency separation is, you know, this is a high, this is great for cloning, but the low frequency is great for selections and blur. It's at a normal blend mode, but this is at a linear light, and it's great. It's like a smarter way to use cloning. But to run this, I'll give you the high pass prompt. I'll change it to 20, but I leave it alone. This is my black and white photography actions where I like to use a channel mixer where you zero out the channels, the red channel, the blue channel, the green channel. Do the same thing. You like to use with monochromatic. And then the vibrance where you just zero out, you negative out the vibrance and negative out the saturation. And then you can also use an adjustment layer, a curves or levels for the contrast. Gradient map, you just want to use a gradient map, and you want to change the blend mode of color. And the black and white unsaturation, where you negative out the saturation, you negative out the hue and the lightness. And the threshold, you're going to be use threshold layer, and you want to use the color blend mode, where first, if you just do it regular, it'll be black and it'll be white. But then if you just put up color blend mode, you can have a pretty cool black and white. Then there's a more complicated black and white where you run actions in groups, many layers. And then, you know, it's one black and white, and it's in a combination. I like to use this. I like to maybe for portraits, I like to use one of these and then end with this and just make adjustments according to what I want to see. So that's my black and white. This is my workflow illustration, what it looks like. You have the layers, navigator. You have the layers, channels, paths, adjustments, properties, info. You have the navigator, which is here. You have the swatches, library, history, histogram, actions, and then you have your brush. So these are my photography groups, my Facebook groups, and my meetup groups. These are my business links, my Twitter, my LinkedIn, my Google, Instagram. And my photography. Now my YouTube channel, where I'll post all the recordings. Got my fine art website, my general photography where I've started to do black and white portraits or just products. you have any questions, you can just always email me at mpicciarelliart2016@gmail.com. I don't see any questions, and I thank you for letting me, give this presentation. Maybe if you consider liking and then maybe subscribing, you'll have many updates to my still life photography, my Photoshop, my light painting, and my equipments. Thank you for listening to this class presentation on props with the black plexiglass table.